What is the big controversy about Jordan Peterson? Some of his self-improvement advice is good, but sometimes he will comment on issues outside of psychology he is not too educated on, and these comments make him controversial. Some examples. Peterson often calls his political opponents postmodern neo-Marxists. This term has got a lot of criticism because postmodernism and Marxism are two very different and contradictory philosophies. Postmodernists believe that history cannot be described as one meta-narrative, whereas Marxists believe that there is a common story throughout history where the oppressed, e.g. slaves, serfs, peasants, workers, will always rise up against the oppressors, e.g. masters, lords, employers. Peterson has been accused of misrepresenting the Canadian Law Bill C-16. He claimed it allowed people to be arrested and sent to jail for refusing to use trans people's pronouns. A lot of legal experts disagreed that the law allowed people to do this, however. Many people have called Peterson hypocritical for often saying, "Clean your room before you try to change the world," whilst he himself has had massive drug problems yet still comments on politics and world events. Some of Peterson's opinions on gender relations have been criticized. He attributes almost all differences in outcomes between genders, e.g. pay gap, differences in job choices, to men and women simply making different choices and wanting different things. He claims cultural expectations or discrimination are not at play at all. He also has been criticized for claiming that women wear makeup to simulate arousal. And Peterson has been accused of victim blaming for saying women who wear makeup and then complain about sexual harassment are hypocritical. Recently, after his drug problems, he has been accused of acting more erratically, going on strange Twitter rants about trans actor Elliot Page and an overweight model. An aspect that I don't think others mentioned is his philosophy towards religion and political activism. His favorite buzzword next to postmodern neo-Marxist is Judeo-Christian values. He claims not to be a Christian in cosmic terms, but believes that Christianity is the foundation for Western values, and the seed from which all our modern sensibilities came from. As an atheist, I think many of our modern values arose despite the strong Christian vein in America. And his rhetoric suggests the Western world is default superior in virtually all moral aspects. The only thing that is undermining Western superiority is new millennial ideas around gender and responsibility. He claims we should embrace Christian values regardless of the feasibility of its narrative, and has a lot of anti-atheist rhetoric, casting atheists as nihilists that seek to degrade tried and true Christian values because we're made miserable by our lack of moral compass and we want the world to reflect our nihilism. He also demonizes protesters who want to better the world as deflecting responsibility. Lazy whiners that want to blame others for them being miserable. This is a pretty privileged, bigoted take that ignores the systemic oppression many experience. He has certainly some good points. Citation needed. Scientific racism, scientific transphobia, scientific homophobia, scientific misogyny. He makes things up and willfully misinterprets studies to suit his often bizarre narratives. He's pretty popular as a self-help guru, but his personal life is an enormous mess. His communication style is basically a running gish gallop combined with the most convoluted grammatical structures you've ever seen. It's the sort of thing that works on the easily conned. Personally, I dislike him because his words are all fluff. If you summarize what he's saying, he says contradictory stuff, or repeats the same thing, or says his opinions like they're facts. He also has some very outdated, old-fashioned, boomer-level morals, and he tries to portray them as the right thing. I'm still struggling to see why people think he's an intellectual messiah, or find anything that groundbreaking and original about what he's saying. He just seems stern, humorless, and condescending. He's the patron saint of pseudo-intellectuals. He is someone who has learned how to speak with an oratory style that makes him appear to be an expert on whatever he is talking about. But he really isn't any more educated on most of the things he talks about than your average person. Which wouldn't be a problem if he didn't have as many rabid followers as he does. He is indicative of one of the biggest problems we deal with today. When someone who sounds smart uses language that backs up your personal bias, you believe they know what they're talking about, no matter how ridiculous they actually are. He is Canadian. This is a guy who has made such controversial claims as, a society run as a patriarchy makes sense and stems largely from the competence of males. The notion of white privilege is a farce. He's a dumb man's idea of a smart man, something he himself admits. I think it started with the Bill C-16 discussion. He made some videos criticizing the bill and many people found his ideas to be good. Then the people who liked the bill heard about it and both groups started arguing at the University of Toronto campus. Peterson ended up being there and talked to some people about it while someone recorded the conversation and uploaded it to YouTube. That was when I first saw him. I think many people were impressed by how serious he took the arguments of his opponents and how well-spoken he was. So already at the start of his online fame, he had taken a side in a controversial issue. While he himself was not very right-wing, his opponents were all left-wing and perceived him to be a right-wing transphobe. Over the years, leftist people have continued to be critical of him and he has kind of ended up on the right-wing side. Even if he wasn't there at the start, I actually think he has moved some right-leaning people to the left. E.g., with his acceptance of gay people, and their choice to have children, and his evolutionary explanations. There is also the fact that while his university students were primarily women, the people who listen to him online are primarily men. Thus, he has come to be perceived as someone who talks to men specifically and deals with men's issues. I think it's common for left-wing people to highlight things happening to the individual, rather than the individual's agency. This might be a way to protest against victim blaming, but sometimes it goes too far and removes agency from individuals. Peterson often talks to the individual rather than comments on the things happening to them. He wants to give people a sense of agency to change their situation. This can be interpreted as victim blaming by people who don't understand which level of explanation he is focusing on and what the purpose is. He seldom seems to adjust his opinions to what is socially accepted. This means that sometimes he agrees with what is socially accepted and sometimes he doesn't. I think this is true for most of us. At least those who don't just copy whatever opinions people around them have to fit in. But people tend to avoid speaking about their controversial opinions. Peterson is asked about such things all the time, which means that there are plenty of excerpts from interviews where he said something many people don't agree with. For instance, he was asked if he thought trans women were women and when "it depends on what you mean by women" wasn't accepted as an answer, and he was asked what he thought according to his own definition. He said, "No, I don't agree with that. I view trans women as women, but I accept that an old Canadian man might have another opinion than I do." Some people viewed this as transphobic and unacceptable though. I think when people compare him to other men with a male audience, such as Andrew Tate, I know that they don't know anything about Peterson. He and Tate are like polar opposites. It's funny how everyone talks about Peterson's controversial ideas about trans issues and freedom of speech. when I think that his most controversial idea should be his view of reality. He believes that the most basic truth is pragmatic truth and not objective truth. This seems to be the basis for his religious belief. I agree with a lot of what is being said here, but it all comes down to something much simpler. He is the scientific, astemic justification of right-wing, masculine, dominant behavior. He's a privileged boomer who thinks that political protest makes you look silly. He thinks that you can't complain about anything because 100 years ago things were worse. He reeks of privilege and doesn't understand that most people have no way of improving their life under the circumstances they live in. His claim to dislike ideology is hilarious considering that he's the biggest ideologue around. He's sexist. He obviously doesn't follow his own advice. He believes in a woke war, as if some people on Twitter are actually trying to destroy Western values with wokeness. By Western values he means being a sexist. He believes the capitalist lie that anyone can be rich if they just try hard enough. His obsession with masculinity is very clearly a defense mechanism to hide his huge insecurities. Overall, if he just stuck to giving basic advice, no one would care. But he decides to state his sexist right-wing opinions as facts and people swallow it up because he's a professor in a field that has nothing to do with politics. He promotes toxic masculinity and sees everything that he doesn't understand as an attack on his values, which are the warped perception he has of the world because he grew up so privileged. The fact that he builds these toxic political opinions into his speeches that white men in their 20s without a father eat up makes him an awful person. I know friends without fathers who love the guy. Those friends will also take every opportunity to make a sexist comment and talk about how wokeness ruins the world. Oh, and the fact that he said he will quit Twitter, then didn't. Then he got banned for hateful comments and made a 30-minute video crying about it. Clean your room, from the guy with a disgusting room. Don't do drugs, from the guy who couldn't come off benzos without being put in an artificial coma. He's just unlikable. People who only hear his way of talking, which sounds sophisticated, and don't understand what he's actually saying, worship him because they think anything said with lots of complex words has to be true. He doesn't have any good points, and the fact that he is somehow considered the intellectual guiding light of the modern conservative movement shows just how morally and intellectually bankrupt the right is. The major thing for people is his views on trans issues. I personally don't find anything he's ever said about it that I'm aware of to be too crazy. Maybe don't necessarily agree on most of it, but I really don't think he's as evil as people make him out to be. Another thing is the apparent hypocrisy in his self-help and psychology work and the serious benzo addiction he fell into. Look, I get what people are saying, but I've seen some of the strongest, most unmotivated people in my life fall to drug addiction. So I mean, IDK, it is what it is. I'm not sure it's a trump card to completely discredit the entirety of his work with young men. I used to follow him in high school. I've realized I disagree on a lot of things with him, and only listen to a podcast he's in or something of the like once in a blue moon. Been quite a while since he's came into my radar. But like IDK, he's fine. He's done some real good for people. He sounds like Kermit the Frog. He cries all the time. I think he's alright enough. Not perfect, but fine. Edit. Psychology, not psychiatry. No one mentioning he denies climate change for really dumb reasons, and it's obvious he just doesn't understand it. Interesting persona is one way to describe him. I prefer misogynistic bigot. Jordan Peterson proposes no solutions to problems. most of which are perceived by him alone and catastrophically misrepresents data. This is especially true concerning women in the workplace, societal behavior and climate change. He complains about women, black people and other discriminated demographics holding positions of power. He claims to be an evolutionary biologist and a neuroscientist, yet has no qualifications in these fields, nor any understanding of those subjects. This is the reason for his confusion and false equivalence when modeling human social hierarchies on lobsters. He is a transphobic drug addict who is emotionally unstable, prone to bouts of spontaneous weeping during discussions, and continuously betrays a woeful lack of understanding regarding data science, the human condition and his own prejudices. He has simply revealed who he always was, an intellectually dishonest charlatan who was unceremoniously thrown out of academia. He has no friends there despite the narrative he peddles. He talks a lot of BS and is very good to make it sound smart. He talks to people who aren't informed about certain issues and comes up with very smart sounding and logical sounding things, just leaves out some things, twists it here and there to fit into the argument he wants to make. He has a certain viewpoint and then finds things that support his viewpoint, which is not really a good approach in science. One should test, observe and then make conclusion. Peterson starts with the conclusion, nitpicks whatever study doesn't fit with his idea and misuses others. There have been several scientists who complained about Peterson misinterpreting their works for his agenda. And in this day and age, people for whatever reason rather follow an ideology or a person than to put the work in to inform themselves and accept conclusions, even those they don't like. Peterson sounds smart, says the things some people want to hear, and then those people just go with it. One of the most prominent and obvious examples is him arguing that a gender pay gap doesn't exist. That only works out for him because the people he talks to come into that debate with barely any knowledge. A person who has no knowledge would probably perceive Peterson as quite smart watching that, while a person with knowledge would probably have several WTF moments. He's basically a self-help guy for disaffected men, and he's on the wrong side in the culture wars, which makes him controversial. Even more so is the fact that while spouting all this stuff about how to be an upstanding person, he was addicted to benzos. Basically kind of a grifter. But if his advice speaks to you and helps you improve yourself, follow it.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. TooAfraidToAsk is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.